Hi, Raven. First of all, I want to thank you for reading out my story about my wife using a Ouija board. To be precise, doing Glasierrücken, as we call this thing in Germany. I really appreciate it. It made my day. Thank you for sending it in. I want to share another story with you about a childhood friend of mine. Again, I have to mention that I'm not a native speaker or writer, so I apologize in advance. As I mentioned in the previous story, I grew up in a small town in Germany that is surrounded by dense forest. You can only imagine what these woods have seen over the centuries. The Great Barrier between the Roman Empire and the Germanic barbarian tribes, the so-called limes, isn't far from there. So, it could be true that 2,000 years ago, Roman soldiers wandered through there, and then came the Middle Ages. The 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, World War II, and so on. This town I lived in is in a relatively old settlement that has probably been around for centuries. No one can tell for sure how old it is since there are no scriptures left from centuries ago, and our Germanic ancestors were illiterate. And since I grew up there were these rumors about a certain part of the forest. You can't quite narrow it down to a specific topic, but the overall narrative is that something is lurking in these woods. The story that I want to tell you must have taken place in the late 90s when my childhood friend and some other friends went camping in these woods. They were all familiar with the old wives' tales, so to say. Now, this probably doesn't mean much to you, but it actually tells you a lot about how far off the grid this town must be, if it's possible to just wander off into the woods, light a fire, and camp there, in a highly regulated country like Germany. In most other parts, it wouldn't take long before the police showed up, and this probably would be the case today. Anyhow, they were staying in these woods and did what teenagers and young adults do when they're all alone. And these things often circled around the consumption of alcohol and weed. And please keep in mind that in Germany, teenage alcoholism isn't considered a huge issue. Well, as they were partying, my friends got a bit drunk, but not like totally wasted. He had a good time listening to blasting music and partying with his friends until he felt the urge to pee. So he went up a small path on a hill that's maybe like 20 meters away from the fireplace. He crossed the tree line and went to an open field next to the woods, and suddenly stood in the awe-inspiring silence below a star-filled night sky. So it was the perfect place to pee, which he did. And right as he finished, in that very moment, he saw it. A completely black figure floating 2 meters above the ground with a glowing white face approaching him. At least, he described it that way. It had facial features, but not proportioned like a human being. The proportions were much bigger, with big black eye holes that were the darkest of dark you can imagine. Almost as if you would look into the embodiment of nothing, if that makes sense. It came close to him, about 5 meters, not saying anything, but more like it wanted to present itself to my friend. And he, of course, was frozen in fear and was, in fact, as it later turned out, already in shock. It remained there for a few seconds until it flew away into the sky at a speed that he described as faster than anything humans have ever built. He remained there for a few moments until he could catch his breath again and was able to move. He stumbled back into the camp with a facial expression that made it instantly clear to anyone that he saw something atrocious. So they paused the music and turned to him. He was dizzy, mumbled, and stuttered, unable to build a sentence. Then soon afterwards, he started shivering and was able to tell the others what he had just experienced. The way he did that made clear that he was not messing with them. Considering this whole thing, they should have brought him to the hospital, as he was obviously in shock. Instead, every single one of these strong, competent men decided that they would not stay at this place any longer. They packed up their stuff and left. When they brought my friend to his parents' house, he was still visibly shaking because, well, the shock. After that, he had trouble sleeping and going into the dark again, fearing that he would see that white face again. Over the years, things became normal again with him and the people around him. And soon the whole thing became sort of a joking matter for us boys, claiming that, insert his name here, I just saw someone's white behind or something like that. It's basic psychiatry. We laugh off what we can't explain. For whatever he saw that night, I highly doubt that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But what was that thing that he saw in the night? Was it a ghost? Was it an entity that has lingered the Earth for aeons and has been forgotten in time? Was it something from another planet? Was it something that we humans don't even have the words to describe? Whatever it was, the white face was never seen again, and it remains a mystery what it's hiding behind the darkest eye holes that you could think of. A while back, I gave you my story about a girl in high school that nobody seems to remember but me. You used the story in one of your postings on YouTube, so I thank you for that. There's something else about me that I would like to share with you. I'm 52 years old now, soon to be 53. I'm too old to care what people think about me, so I'll be honest about this, as I have kept these experiences very secret in my life, until now. I haven't even spoke about much of this to my closest friend. I have the ability to sense energy both from the living and the dead. I can tell whether I'm going to like a person or not immediately as soon as I meet them, simply because of the energy they give off. This ability seems to affect my mother's side of the family. My mother's twin sister wrote a letter to my mother when I was a child, admitting to her that she could see dead people around her, people that were deceased. It all started when my aunt was a little girl. She said when she came home from school, she looked on the roof of her house and saw a man standing on the roof. She asked the man, "What are you doing on the roof of my house?" The man folded his arm and said something to her telepathically and then vanished. That ability seemed to have skipped my mother and hit me. Although my ability is not as strong as my aunt's was, as I cannot see spirits. But I can tell when they're around. It started on me when I was 7 years old. I was at my grandparents' house on Christmas Day. We opened up presents and my grandparents were preparing Christmas dinner. Being the 7-year-old child that I am at that time, I told my dad that I was going upstairs to use the bathroom. When I went upstairs, after using the restroom, I went to open the bathroom door. I got the door open no more than a quarter of the way when the door slammed right in my face. I tried to open the door, but there was a disembodied female voice on the other side. She kept saying to me, "No, Tim, no, Tim." Finally, I screamed so loud for help that somebody came upstairs and I was able to open the door. I ran out asking who was that woman behind the door. She wouldn't let me out. But my relatives insisted that there was nobody upstairs. I didn't know what to think about it. My grandparents lived in the Sheet and Tube Company homes in Campbell, Ohio at the time. Those company homes were built in a very early 1900s. Some of them have been torn down, but there's still a few of them left, and they're over 100 years old. The people that still live in them have told me that they have experienced things in those places that cannot easily be explained. Finally, the last incident that happened to me, I'll explain to you. Fast forward to when I was 14 years old. Then, I was living on the east side of Youngstown, Ohio, at the time, near Lincoln Park. Unfortunately, the only other guy to verify this story no longer lives around me, as him and his family moved to Arizona when I was 14 years old. This friend was named Joey, and he had a sister named Diana. So if Joey happened to hear this story on YouTube, that I haven't seen him since I was 14, I would just like to say hello to him. The story that he would be able to verify is as follows. It was a summer day, and me and Joey were down at Lincoln Park swinging on the swings, talking about kid stuff and minding our own business. All of a sudden, a very terrible, negative energy came over me, to the point that I got sick to my stomach and wanted to vomit. I told Joey I didn't feel good and wanted to go home. He told me that he didn't feel good either. It's strange that we both felt the same thing at the same time. There's a set of steps just behind the security park office that leads up out of the park. The closer I got to that steps, the sicker I got to my stomach. I tried to drink a sip of water from the water fountain, but I just spit it right back up, as did Joey. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a disembodied voice that said, "Get out of here." I asked Joey if he heard that. Instead, he told me that he thought he heard someone say, "Quiet, I want to get them." I whispered to Joey, "Let's get out of here," and run through the woods out of the park. We ran through the woods up to the back road out of the park that led up to the 422 highway in Youngstown, Ohio. As we went over the bridge, which is above Lincoln Park, my stomach started to calm down and I felt better. But here's the scary part. Right after we got to the other side of the bridge, on the left-hand side, there's a fire station there. As we walked past it, a station wagon pulled up alongside us, and the guy inside the car said, "You smart-ass kids, I'll get you next time." Me and Joey looked at each other and we couldn't believe what we had just heard. That guy was trying to kidnap both of us. We went home and told our parents about it, but I don't remember if they ever called the police or not. I don't know where that disembodied voice came from, but it saved my life, and Joey's as well. Throughout my life, I've had many other experiences with spirits, but I won't go into those right now. But these experiences have affected me throughout my life. As a Christian, I do believe that there are both good spirits and evil spirits around us all the time. And the kind of person we are in ourselves is what we invite around us. Because of that, I choose to love people as much as I can, to bring about the positive things around me. Hi, Raven. I really enjoy listening to your stories, so I thought I would submit one of my own. Growing up, I lived in an odd-feeling house with my mom, dad, and brother. Things regularly went missing and turned up in odd places. Mostly, it just felt like you were being watched, but it was the overall heavy feeling of the place that lent to our belief that someone was there. However, there weren't very many concrete experiences to use as an example. Just weird vibes and some odd things going on. Well, one night it all changed suddenly. It was New Year's Eve sometime around mid-2000s. Well, technically New Year's Day since it was about 2 a.m. We had been to a small party with my immediate family and my brother's girlfriend. We returned home early. My dad and my brother had been arguing that night, so emotions were heightened. Everyone was already on edge, but no one had been drinking. My mom, my brother's girlfriend, and I were standing in the kitchen having a light-hearted discussion about the supernatural to break up the tension from earlier. My dad and brother were outside during this whole exchange. Anyways, eventually the discussion veered to our house in question. About how someone else was in the house, how we could feel him at times. The girlfriend said that she never had a supernatural experience, but was terrified of the idea of it happening. We admitted that things were quiet here, but we definitely weren't alone. She said, "Talking about this kind of freaks me out." And my mom and I both assured her it was okay. Nothing bad would happen, and that the spirit just liked to hang around us, and then it happened. The kitchen's kind of circular, and there were 3 of us standing about 5 feet from one another in a triangle. On the counter, about 2 feet from me, an empty plastic bottle that was sitting about 6 inches from the edge of the counter suddenly fell off the counter. It didn't just flop onto the ground. No, it jumped and spiraled in the air like someone whacked it hard, and it flew onto the floor in between the three of us, as if the spirit was saying, "Haha, yeah, I'm here." We just looked at each other in shock. I asked them the typical, "You saw that, right?" The girlfriend just nodded, absolutely terrified, and my mom said, "Yep, guess he wanted us to see that." It was crazy. After years of feeling weird in the house, all of a sudden there was an overt experience with a witness as well. And no one else was in the house but the three of us. There was nothing else on the counter either, nor could someone have possibly orchestrated the bottle falling. It just flew off the counter on its own, right in the middle of our discussion about said ghost in the house. It was bizarre. Things don't fly off counters, but after years of living there, and years of feeling like being watched, we finally had something happen to confirm these feelings. Anyway, as the years went on, things kept happening in the house, but as always they were small, nearly inconsequential. But that heavy feeling of being watched continued. Things stopped going missing, thankfully. Honestly, at most times it felt okay. Like whomever was there wanted us to know for sure they were there, and that they were as used to us as we were of them. Most paranormal experiences seem to be intimidating or aggressive, but somehow, ours ended up just being like a pal. Like a roommate who never left and apparently only made themselves known to make a point at the most opportune moment. Anyway, thank you for letting me share my odd little experience. As the topic of this write-up is of the Islamic lore, it's proper that Tom wanted to open this with a quote. "And I did not create the jinn and human beings except that they should worship me," from the Quran. And the rest of this is Tom's write-up. I have to start this by thanking Raven for letting me do this one, as it could be considered a bit of a niche topic, but it's one that I find absolutely fascinating, and I look forward to sharing it with you all. The jinn are some of the most prevalent entities in Islamic lore, and they're a very complicated species to really quantify. Some would call them ghosts, but that implies that they are undead, when they in fact do not fall into the category of undead whatsoever. Others equate these beings to demons, but even this isn't quite accurate, as this label implies that all jinn are malevolent beings, and, well, that's just not quite true. You see, while they feature very prominently in Islamic culture and lore, the origins of the jinn actually predate the Islamic faith, appearing in far older religions of the Middle East. Although in the Quran itself, when it speaks of the jinn, it does mention that much like humans, Allah gave the jinn free will. And this is something that I find incredibly interesting, because not even the angels were given free will. It also piques my curiosity because, being raised in a Western Christian household, I've always heard that only humans were given free will, and so to hear that there was another species given free will, it's actually really quite kind of exhilarating to me. So, while the jinn don't quite fit the label of ghost or demon, just because they have free will, it still doesn't quite make them fall suitably into the human category either. Although, just like humans, jinn have the capacity to be both good and evil. Some jinn are either believers in God, while others are not. So the very nature of the jinn is as varied and complex as that of the human condition. Since they're definitely a supernatural entity, and can be both good or evil, then the most suitable Western explanation to draw a parallel with, I would have to say, would be the Fae. The Fae are generally tied to nature or referred to as nature spirits, and that isn't far off from what jinn would be seen as in their native Middle East. They also have both good and evil Fae as well, as Fae that kind of play jump rope with the lines of morality. Fae also take up residence in trees, caves, and other places associated with nature or the outdoors. The same can be said of the jinn. If you were ever outdoors somewhere in the Levant and found you needed to relieve yourself, then most locals would probably caution you against doing so under a tree, as there might be a djinn living under that tree, and perhaps even sleeping there as we speak. And, well, it'd be quite rude, wouldn't it? The consequences of actually insulting a djinn in such a fashion could range from suffering incredibly poor luck, severe illness, and even death. But the djinn's relationship with humans can be even more complex than such encounters and reprisals. During my research on the djinn, I even found a fatwa issued in 2024 that spoke about using Muslim jinn as servants. I'll paraphrase a bit here, but the gist of it says that the world of jinn is real, and that to believe in it is obligatory. It also states that interactions between humans and jinns are not the norm, but states that a jinn may be subjugated and made to serve certain humans, just as other humans are often made to do. The fatwa cites the story of Solomon enslaving the demons and using them to build his temple in Jerusalem as a kind of basis or justification for using jinn in similar ways. This sounds even more messed up once we consider the fact that jinn have free will. And then we hit the ethical wall in regards to slavery and all of that other really dark stuff, which is probably a topic better suited to a different podcast than this one. Many of the entities in Islam today that are recognized as jinn actually date back before the existence of the Islamic faith, and are deity figures from the more ancient pagan tribes that once lived in the area that have kind of been annexed into the Islamic faith, even if their lofty titles of being some kind of god might have been downgraded slightly. But the cultures of the Levant have never had much in the ways of issues when it comes to co-opting other people's religious pantheon into their own. In fact, going back to the earliest days of civilization in the region, each town once had its own patron god, and when another city came to attack, it was common practice to carry the shrine or statue of the conquered city's deity back to the conquering city's temple. By doing this, you acknowledge the other civilization's god, but at the same time, declare the supremacy of your civilization's god. As such, the tradition of incorporating other societies' religious beliefs into their own dates far back before the time of Islam. Jinn, it seems, are no exception to this. And while some of them may have gone from being regarded as some kind of deity figure to something a bit more mundane, the fact remains that the jinn are as ancient as humanity. And if religious texts are to be believed, then we share a common origin as well as share space on this planet. While the jinn might be considered a largely Middle Eastern kind of thing, I'm compelled to tell you that this is really not the case. The jinn are definitely not a phenomenon restricted to the Middle East by any means. Let's keep in mind that, for all intents and purposes, they are like human beings with their own agendas, wants, etc. Their, let's call it, society, would be pretty similar to ours. And so it seems to derive from this that jinn would of course want to travel and see as much of their world as we humans want to of ours. So, while they may not be called jinn in all corners of the world, you can certainly find entities that fit the general description of a jinn. In the Western world, the Fae have a lot in common with them. They're supernatural creatures with extremely long lifespans, and are often associated with magic and other extremely good or extremely bad fortune. Many times in stories, they are referred to as tricksters, who often try to lead humans astray, usually for their own amusement, or as punishment for some perceived slight. And sometimes in encounters, if someone is able to outwit the jinn or fae, they will often be granted some kind of prize or boon that often ends up being some kind of double-edged sword. The last thing really is an expression of a jinn's free will. The creature would be actively making a decision to engage with humans, either for its own entertainment or its own amusement. At least, I can only surmise that these would be the two primary motives for tricking or punishing humans. From the religious standpoint, it would probably seem as if the nefarious jinn were seeking to tempt humans into sin and draw them off the holy path and onto one of temptation. A kind of spiritual hurdle to be cleared in order to progress along one's religious journey and to grow. This, I suppose, could be why some people view them as demonic or infernal entities. Although, I would argue that there are humans that seek to do these kinds of things as well, and yet we don't classify them as demonic, but evil, most certainly. I think that it is truly interesting that jinn are such a common cultural phenomenon that even the dominant religion of the area has had to acknowledge them, and even make them a part of its dogma. But it's also intriguing that the jinn themselves have kind of transcended religion, and even fit into the more secular aspects of the culture. They feature in art and literature, both religious and not. In fact, we're all quite familiar with the famous jinni, or genie, from the story of Aladdin's lamp. Another famous story of a jinni also comes to us from the 1001 Arabian Nights, in the form of a story called The Fisherman and the Jinni. The story goes that a fisherman casts his net 4 times a day, and catches nothing but useless items until he retrieves a copper jar. When he opens the jar, he unleashes not the benevolent, if mischievous, jinni, such as from the story of Aladdin, but a creature that is fueled by vengeance. The jinni have been imprisoned by King Solomon, and had sworn to grant whoever freed him from the jar their choice of death. The fisherman, realizing he's in terrible danger, questions the jinni's power, saying that if it were so large and powerful, there is no way it could ever fit into such a tiny jar. Eager to prove its power, the jinni shrinks itself down and re-enters the jar, allowing the fisherman to reseal the jar and save his own life. So while often described as incredibly or all-powerful paranormal or supernatural beings made of smokeless fire, even the most powerful and angry jinn can be outsmarted if one has quick enough wits. The moral of the story actually teaches us that what seems to be an overwhelming powerful enemy can be defeated by means other than brute force. Not only teaching that there are non-violent solutions, but solutions that aren't always evident. But there are other famous tales about jinn, many of them coming from the 1001 Arabian Nights. Some of these stories include Sinbad in the Valley of Diamonds, in which the titular character finds a valley full of diamonds that is guarded by a giant snake, which the famous sailor soon figures out is an evil jinn in disguise. Again, using wit, the protagonist proves that even the most powerful jinn can be outsmarted, and Sinbad escapes the valley with a substantial amount of the diamonds. Also, such stories as the City of Brass, where 3 explorers search for the fabled City of Brass, and tells of a brass vessel in which Solomon had trapped a jinn, again highlighting the recurring theme of jinn being bound to vessels such as pots or jars. It also once more links a specific story about a jinn and King Solomon being the one to have sealed him. All in all, I would recommend anyone that is more curious about some of the Arabian lore, or anyone that loves a good adventure story, to check out the 1001 Arabian Nights as a whole. The stories tend to follow what could be called the traditional formula of an adventure tale, but you can't deny that the formula works, as most adventure stories today follow it almost to the letter. Most of the stories begin with the introduction to the protagonist, a brief overview of the journey he is currently in the middle of, and then we meet the antagonist or encounter whatever obstacle is on the path, and ultimately learn some kind of moral lesson as the brave hero escapes with the treasures, saves the girl, or otherwise emerges victorious from his tribulation. Simple, effective, and makes for some of the best stories. In some ways, the tales that we have of the jinn often have them serving as some kind of fodder for the tale of morality, or of overcoming the odds. The jinn are often portrayed as arrogant and full of themselves, so very confident in their ability to best another mortal in some kind of twisted game of chance. All in all, I think the lessons that can be taken away from stories like these are that there are always unseen solutions to your problems, and just because you can't outfight a threat does not mean that all hope is lost. And there's always the chance that you can outsmart the seemingly unbeatable and all-powerful foe, even if it is supernatural. Then again, as I think about it, That sounds much like the Fae from the many morality tales from the Western world. Arthurian and Irish legends abound with similar stories of encounters with the Fae or fairy folk. Often, with them, the antagonist foil for the valiant king or Ireland's child of light. Oh, and just a little lore for you all. Did you know that the purpose behind knocking on wood is done to ask for a favor from the fairies? So, now you know what you are in fact doing when you, quote, knock on wood. So whether you call them Fae or you call them Jinn, make sure you consider who might be sleeping or otherwise residing under that nice shade tree before you relieve yourself while you're out camping or hiking. Hi, Raven. These two stories happened within a few weeks of us moving into our first house in Derbyshire, UK. The house was about 80 years old. I'd gotten home from work and went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, and there on the worktop was a small brass weight, the kind people used on those old-fashioned weighing scales. I picked it up thinking my partner, Jonathan, must have found it and left it there that morning, as I had gone to work before him, so I wouldn't have been aware if so. So I made my tea, and then Jonathan arrived home. I showed him the weight and asked where he had found it. He looked totally surprised, stating that he had never seen it before, which I believed, because he was not the type of person to play tricks. We still have the weight, but we never figured out where it came from. The second story is about us in the same house a few weeks later. We were sat quietly reading late one evening in our living room, which was located off of the kitchen. Then suddenly we heard a bell ring. It came from the kitchen. It wasn't a doorbell because we didn't have one. It sounded more like one of those bells they have on hotel reception desks to alert staff that someone is at the desk and needing assistance. We both looked at each other, and I said, "Did you hear that?" Jonathan confirmed he had, but continued reading. He's not easily spooked. But I am, and I jumped up to peer into the kitchen, seeing nothing there that could have made the noise. We didn't have neighbors, and the road was not busy because of the time of night, and the noise definitely came from the kitchen. Jonathan then stated that he was going to bed, so I quickly followed him, saying, "Wait for me." It really spooked me, and it still gives me goosebumps when I tell the story to anyone. I hope you enjoy the stories. We stayed in that house for 17 years, and nothing else happened. And we never figured out what could have caused the two incidents to happen. Thanks. I love listening to your stories, and you have a great storytelling voice. Thank you. First of all, I love your voice, Raven. It's soothing to me, my mom, and my sister. We all listen to your podcast. Thank you. Second, I'm bad at spelling, but I'm sure you can get what I'm trying to say. Third, I'm not trying to get anyone to believe in what I believe in. For context, my grandma used to babysit us a lot. And not that it matters, but my sister is about 2 years younger than me. She's a funny, caring, and kind lady. I've had plenty of paranormal experiences in my life, and yes, I believe in it. I was little, like a toddler at the time, and this happened several times. My grandma told me about this, by the way. I would go into our living room just fine with others, but when my grandma would tell me to go watch TV, I would tell her that the boy was in there. My grandma would say that there was no one in there, but I thought there was a scary little boy in there. I even remember what he looked like. She would turn on the TV and I would be fine. But I was persistent that this boy existed, and that he stayed in the living room. This is one of my many paranormal experiences. I would normally think this was an imaginary thing that I made up as a kid, but I remember this little boy, and I was terrified. Also, my grandma would never tell me something like this and have it be false. So That, my friends, was a collection of technically 5 paranormal stories and a write-up on a supernatural being that Tom really wanted to do. I wasn't going to deny him the ability to do so. It may seem odd to do a write-up in a paranormal video, and it's definitely not something we're going to do too often. We do intend to do a write-up on, like, haunted places, which will be... The entire write-up will be research on haunted and cursed places around the world, much closer to Halloween. But he wanted to write about what the Jinn were. He gets awkwardly interested in some of the, like, supernatural and odd things out in the world, and I'm not gonna deprive him from that. We have a good relationship, he and I. He has ideas, he writes things, and I pay him to do so. It's a professional relationship. We're friends, but it's very professional. And I gotta say, whenever he comes to me and says, "Hey, I have this idea. I don't know if it'll work on your channel. Here's what I want to do. Here's some information on it. What do you think?" Typically, I'm like, "Hey, man, you have creative control on this one. If you can fit it in somewhere into a topic, or you can write it and convince me that it will work in a topic, I'll do it." So, honestly, it works out really well. The way I described it makes me kind of sound like a jerk, but I promise you, I'm nice to the guy about his work. He'll hopefully attest to that in the comments below. Tom, I need your help here. I'm waffling, bro. Anyways, yeah, some paranormal stuff. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you're enjoying this daily content. This is day 11 according to my calendar, which would put us at about a third of the way through the daily content. So it's moving fast, which is crazy because I'm getting these done way before they go live. So to know that they're going this fast for me means they're going to go very, very fast whenever they go live, too. So, I don't know. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If you are, please do let me know. If you're not, well, don't let me know. That's going to hurt my feelings. Or do. It's up to you. One of the cool things you can do if you like it is to hit the like button on the video. Thumbs up. You can also subscribe to the channel if you like what you heard and want more content like this, and leave me a comment with your thoughts on the stories. Stories you want me to do, stories you want me to read, so forth and so on. If you have a story you want to share, be it paranormal, glitch, stalker, creepy thing that happened to you as a child, if you're a trucker and have a story you want to share, etc., go to astheravendreams.com, where there's a big button to send it my way. You can also email it to astheravendreams@gmail.com. While you're there on the website, check out the section below, the submission button, where I think I talk about my book. I think that's the immediate section right below that. And then below that is the section for where you can listen to the podcast on other platforms in longer formats, or you can find me on social media platforms. I think there's an awards and achievements section that I've added in there too. Not super important, but it's cool that I have those. And you can also read stories, fiction stories that I've written on that website as well, if you ever get the chance or get bored and want to read something creepy. Yeah. You can also join Patreon memberships to get early access to content content like this, not content to content like, which is a great idea right now because it is the 16th and this goes up on the 24th. So I am 5 videos up ahead. This will be 6, soon to be 7. And yeah, I'm moving ahead. I'm getting ahead of the curve. So if only I could do this on a regular month where I only do 3 videos a week, I'd be done for the month already. That's crazy. Anyways, friends, hope you have a beautiful day. Hope I see you again here very soon. Until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Don't forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.